Can a relationship survive when nearly 60% of singles admit to doubting the intentions of the opposite gender? In a world where dating apps thrive on fleeting connections, marriages dissolve at staggering rates, and social media amplifies accusations of betrayal, trust between men and women seems more fragile than ever. Modern relationships are navigating uncharted territory. Divorce rates hover near 40% in many countries, while surveys reveal that 1 in 3 singles actively distrust potential partners due to past dishonesty or fear of exploitation. Meanwhile, social expectations are clashing. Women demand accountability in the wake of Me Too. Men voice confusion over evolving gender roles, and both genders grapple with unrealistic ideals perpetuated by influencers and algorithms. From ghosting in casual dating to debates over financial transparency in marriages, the erosion of trust is reshaping how men and women interact, or avoid interacting altogether. For centuries, trust between men and women was codified by rigid gender roles. In patriarchal systems, men were cast as protectors and providers, their trustworthiness tied to their ability to safeguard and sustain families. Women, meanwhile, were expected to reciprocate with loyalty, domestic stewardship, and moral purity. This dynamic created a transactional form of trust. Men derived social status from fulfilling their role, while women depended on men's reliability for survival. However, this bargain often suppressed dissent. Women's voices were sidelined, and men's failures, for example, infidelity, financial neglect, were minimized to preserve societal harmony. Trust here was less about emotional intimacy and more about upholding a scripted order. Marriage historically functioned as an economic and social institution, not a romantic one. Trust was anchored in necessity. Spouses relied on each other to manage land, raise heirs, and maintain status. In agrarian societies, a family's survival depended on shared labor, leaving little room for questioning roles. Dowries, arranged marriages, and religious vows reinforced this contract, with divorce stigmatized as a threat to community stability. While this system offered predictability, it also masked vulnerabilities. Abuse, incompatibility, or quiet despair were often ignored to avoid disrupting the norm. Trust in this context was a pragmatic allegiance to duty, not a choice freely given. The 20th century upheavals, birth control, women's suffrage, and the sexual revolution, shattered these age-old contracts. As women gained financial independence and reproductive autonomy, the old rules of trust became obsolete. Pros emerged. Relationships could now prioritize mutual respect over obligation, and emotional honesty began to replace silent compliance. However, this freedom also bred new tensions. Men, accustomed to their role as gatekeepers of security, struggled to adapt to equality, while women navigated the double bind of asserting autonomy yet still facing societal pressure to balance ambition with traditional caregiving. Suspicion crept in. Men feared being labeled oppressive, women worried about covert misogyny, and both grappled with redefining loyalty in an era of shifting expectations. The result? A paradoxical landscape where liberation empowered individuals but left interpersonal trust untethered from its former anchors. Popular culture and digital media bombard audiences with reductive stereotypes that seed doubt between genders. Television tropes paint men as commitment-phobic players or emotionally stunted man-children, while women are reduced to materialistic gold diggers or hypercritical naggers. Viral social media trends amplify these caricatures. Think toxic masculinity call-out posts or female dating strategy forums that frame relationships as adversarial power struggles. Even well-intentioned movements like the Me Too movement, while vital for accountability, are sometimes co-opted into broader narratives of gender warfare. Algorithms on platforms like TikTok and YouTube exacerbate division, feeding users content that reinforces their biases. For example, all men cheat compilations or women always lie rants. These narratives don't just reflect mistrust, they actively manufacture it, training audiences to view the opposite gender through a lens of suspicion rather than empathy. The rise of dating apps and casual hookup culture has rewritten the rules of intimacy, often at the cost of trust. apps like Tinder prioritize instant gratification, encouraging users to swipe through partners like disposable commodities. Ghosting, breadcrumbing, and situationships leave individuals feeling interchangeable, fostering cynicism about long-term commitment. Meanwhile, social media platforms like Instagram create illusions of perfection, where curated posts of lavish dates or "now relationship goals" hashtags fuel insecurity and FOMO, fear of missing out. Worse, digital interactions breed paranoia. Partners monitor each other's followers, dissect response times to messages, or misinterpret ambiguous posts as proof of disloyalty. A 2023 study found that 52% of couples argue over social media behavior, with many citing it as a primary source of distrust. The paradox? While technology connects us globally, it erodes the vulnerability required for local, lasting trust. Modern society increasingly prioritizes self-actualization over collective well-being, reshaping how we approach relationships. Phrases like "main character energy" and "you owe yourself happiness" dominate self-help discourse, framing compromise as a weakness rather than a virtue. This hyper-individualism clashes with the inherent interdependence of trust. For example, Millennials and Gen Z are more likely to end relationships over irreconcilable differences, like mismatched career goals or unmet personal needs, whereas earlier generations often prioritize stability over self-fulfillment. While this shift empowers people to avoid toxic dynamics, it also risks reducing partnerships to transactional arrangements. When self-care morphs into selfishness and boundaries become emotional barricades, trust struggles to take root. The result? A generation caught between the desire for deep connection and the fear that investing in others might cost them their autonomy. Trust and betrayal are often filtered through gendered lenses. Studies reveal that men and women tend to prioritize different forms of infidelity. Men report greater distress over physical betrayal, for example, sexual encounters, driven by evolutionary concerns about paternity uncertainty, while women often react more strongly to emotional betrayal, for example, a partner confiding in someone else, which threatens relational security and resource commitment. This divide reflects deeper instincts. Men historically needed to ensure offspring legitimacy, while women sought partners invested in long-term provision. These biases persist today, shaping how suspicion arises. A man might fixate on a partner's male friendships, while a woman may interpret emotional withdrawal as a precursor to abandonment. Evolutionary pressures have hardwired distinct risk assessment strategies. Men competing for reproductive opportunities often subconsciously evaluate partners based on traits signaling fertility and fidelity. For example, youth, physical attractiveness. Women, bearing higher biological costs in reproduction, traditionally prioritize partners offering stability, status, and nurturing capacity. These instincts still influence modern trust dynamics. Men may distrust partners who attract too much attention, fearing rivalry, while women may scrutinize a partner's ambition or financial habits as proxies for reliability. However, these tendencies are not destiny. Cultural shifts and gender equality have blurred rigid evolutionary scripts, creating friction when primal instincts clash with contemporary values of mutual respect. Attachment styles, forged in childhood, profoundly shape how trust operates in adult relationships. Securely attached individuals, raised with consistent caregiving, tend to approach partnerships with openness and resilience. In contrast, those with anxious attachment, often stemming from unpredictable parenting, may seek excessive reassurance, interpreting minor conflicts as betrayal, while avoidant individuals, raised in emotionally distant environments, equate trust with vulnerability, retreating at the first sign of friction. These patterns create self-fulfilling prophecies. An anxious partner's clinginess can push an avoidant partner further away, deepening mutual mistrust. Gender norms compound this. Men socialized to suppress emotions may struggle to articulate needs, while women pressured to fix relationships may shoulder disproportionate emotional labor, breeding resentment. Healing these divides requires recognizing how upbringing scripts our relational blueprints and rewriting them through self-awareness and communication. Modern gender discourse is polarized between feminism and reactionary movements like red pill ideology, each fostering distinct narratives about trust. Feminism, rooted in dismantling systemic inequality, encourages women to question traditional power dynamics and demand equitable partnerships. However, critics argue that some interpretations frame men as inherently untrustworthy oppressors, fueling defensiveness. Conversely, red pill communities, often reacting to perceived male disempowerment, peddle distrust of women, reducing relationships to transactional games. For example, women only want money, or men only want sex. These opposing worldviews create a toxic feedback loop. Feminist calls for accountability are weaponized by red pill adherents as man-hating, while red pill rhetoric is dismissed as misogyny, deepening alienation. The result? A cultural battleground where dialogue is replaced by caricature and genuine trust becomes collateral damage. Trust erodes under the weight of uneven expectations. Women are frequently tasked with bearing the brunt of emotional labor, managing household dynamics, remembering milestones, and mediating conflicts, a role society still frames as inherently feminine. When men neglect this labor, women often internalize the blame. Why didn't I communicate better? While men may resent being labeled lazy for failing to meet unspoken expectations. Similarly, accountability wears a gendered mask. Women face harsher scrutiny for sexual autonomy. For example, being called promiscuous for casual dating, while men are often excused for similar behavior as boys being boys. Conversely, men report feeling unfairly vilified in debates about systemic sexism, as if individual actions are conflated with collective guilt. These double standards leave both genders feeling misjudged and defensive, undermining the mutual respect trust requires. Economic transformations have destabilized traditional gender roles, leaving many adrift. As women outpace men in education and enter high-earning fields, some men grapple with a loss of purpose, tied to the erosion of the breadwinner identity. This fuels resentment and insecurity, with red pill spaces often blaming feminism for emasculating men. Meanwhile, women, despite professional gains, still face a second shift at home, juggling careers with disproportionate caregiving duties. A 2022 study found that employed women spend 65% more time on domestic tasks than their male partners, breeding exhaustion and mistrust. Why isn't he pulling his weight? Economic inequality compounds this. Wage gaps force financial dependence in some relationships, while rising costs of living strain partnerships into transactional arrangements. Men may feel reduced to ATMs, women to caretakers, roles that stifle authentic connection. These pressures are not insurmountable, but addressing them requires dismantling the zero-sum mindset. Feminism's push for equality need not vilify men, just as men's vulnerabilities need not scapegoat women. Shared accountability, recognizing that emotional labor and economic burdens are human responsibilities, not gendered ones, can rebuild trust. It starts with rejecting caricatures, listening across divides, and redefining value beyond outdated scripts. Trust begins inward. Before bridging divides with others, individuals must confront their own emotional baggage. Childhood neglect, toxic relationships, or societal conditioning that frames the opposite gender as inherently untrustworthy. Self-awareness practices such as therapy, journaling, or mindfulness help unpack these wounds. For example, a man raised to equate vulnerability with weakness might recognize how his emotional guardedness sabotages intimacy, while a woman socialized to people please might uncover patterns of tolerating dishonesty to avoid conflict. Trauma resolution isn't about assigning blame, but reclaiming agency. How has my past shaped my fears? What narratives do I need to rewrite? Without this introspection, unresolved pain risks projection, seeing every partner through the lens of past betrayals. Trust thrives on clarity, not control. Healthy boundaries, distinct from walls built out of fear, Define mutual expectations without suffocating connection. For instance, agreeing to share phone passwords voluntarily fosters transparency, while demanding access out of suspicion breeds resentment. Communication must move beyond talking to active listening. Paraphrasing a partner's concerns. "It sounds like you feel overlooked when I work late," signals respect more than defensive rebuttals. Similarly, consistency matters. Small acts of reliability, showing up on time, following through on promises, build trust incrementally. Respect also means honoring differences. A man who values solitude isn't withholding, nor is a woman who seeks emotional dialogue needy. Framing these traits as complementary, not conflicting, reframes trust as a collaborative project. In a world unmoored from rigid roles, trust must be consciously co-created. For men, this may involve unlearning stoicism to embrace emotional reciprocity, and for women, resisting the urge to equate independence with emotional detachment. Practical steps include shared vulnerability. Men can practice articulating insecurities. "I fear failing as a provider," while women can voice needs without apology. "I need support, not solutions." Rejecting zero-sum games. Trust isn't a finite resource. A woman's career ambition doesn't diminish a man's worth, just as a man's emotional openness doesn't negate his strength. Community accountability. Seeking mentors, couples workshops, or mixed-gender dialogue groups helps normalize struggles and share strategies. Ultimately, rebuilding trust requires courage to embrace uncertainty. It means choosing faith in a partner's goodwill while honoring one's own boundaries, a balance that transforms suspicion into solidarity. As roles evolve, so must our definition of trust, not as a static contract, but as a living practice of mutual growth.